Fans of a Horus Heresy, thank you very much for joining me for a model, build and tactics review of the Terrax pattern Termite assault drill by Forge World, one of the most recent vehicle additions. So we've just had the Aurochs released, but this is one of the newest vehicles in the Heresy, and here we have it assembled in front of us. So for all you fans of retro vehicle design in the Heresy, and let's be honest, there's a lot of it going on at the moment, this is a very interesting and fascinating model. It's a great looking miniature, as you can see in front of us, and what we're going to do in this video is I'm going to show you the model, show you its features and its detail and what it can do. I'm then going to move on and talk about the build process for this kit, any challenges I found, give you a few tips as well. I'm then going to move on and do a couple of size comparisons against vehicles and miniatures from the Heresy range. And finally, I'm going to finish up by giving you a review and analysis of the rules for using this vehicle, both in 7th edition Horus Heresy games, the Age of Darkness, and also in 8th edition Warhammer 40,000. And to do though is we're going to start by looking at the actual model. And here it is. Oh, it's lovely. This is one of those models that I'm so pleased that Forge World have done it. And this is by one of what I consider to be the sort of troika of top model designers. I mean, Forge World has got lots of great model designers, but this is sculpted by Will Hayes, and the other two who make up that troika are Darren Parwood and of course Stuart Williamson. So this is of the provenance of the Hayes, and Will Hayes normally does dreadnoughts, or is best known for dreadnoughts, but here he's lent his hand to re-imaging a design that actually went all the way back to the epic game of Warhammer 40,000, or Adeptus Titanicus as we originally knew it. Gosh, right, where do we start? Well, I guess we've got to start with the drill. The drill assembly on this is absolutely packed to the teeth with detail. A good few metallics, some nice washers, a couple of good dry brushes, and as much edge highlighting as your sanity can withstand. And this is going to be a great fun thing to paint. What amazing detail. There's just all these grinders and cutters and these 5 melter arrays. The 5 melter arrays tells us about pentagonal symmetry of this, and I guess in that respect it's quite an interesting number, the 5, because we think of 6, but no, this is 5-fold symmetry. So I guess if we were looking in nature, we may think of the echinoderm family, containing things such as the, well, echinoderm and the starfish. Yeah, and absolutely fantastically detailed, and as we'll come to, the design that goes around this to get this detail is very clever as well. If we move to the flanks, we can see the general design of this thing, and it's a truncated cylinder, and in line with the melter cutter, or each melter cutter and grinder, is a track that runs from front to back. We've then got a number of features. So we've got a weapon bay door hatch, and on the top 2 weapon bays we have a set of deployed weapons. At the moment we have the twin-linked Volkite chargers fitted, and we'll come back to those. And then we also have an access door and steps as well, and that repeats all the way around. So this model is a concept of a vehicle that could orientate itself in any particular way underground and still come out the right way up. And once it comes out, it's going to drop onto its 2 lowermost tracks, and off it goes, causing havoc. Moving to the rear of the vehicle, we've got this fascinating looking rear end, and you've got these kind of like what almost look like runoff chutes from a mining facility. And if you ever watched any mining gear, so like heavy mining machinery operating, this might kind of put you in mind of that. And Mr. Hayes has done his homework here, getting the right imagery for these, so I do like that. Then you've got a whole set of engines, power plants, and all sorts of other little thrusty things and gizmos that are supposed to represent the propulsive unit, or part of the propulsive unit of this vehicle. So I guess these tracks are driven, and then there's this thing at the back, and then there's a grinder at the front. And when you think about it, given that this is supposed to tunnel through rock and the substrate, it's going to need loads and loads of power to drive it through. So hence you've got tracks, you've got grinders, and you've got an engine at the back to thrust it forward. Yeah, I can just imagine all those working in unison to drive this through the earth. And in that respect, it's very nicely realised as a concept of what a subterranean tunnelling vehicle may look like. And then we're done. The pentagonal symmetry of this means it's quite similar from any particular direction, and If it were not for the extended weapon bays, and you don't actually get an option to have these closed, although I suppose if you wished you could craft yourself some doors closed like that, you wouldn't be able to tell which way is up, and that's the idea. It's supposed to be like that. It's an orientationless vehicle until it emerges, and then it drops onto 2 tracks. The inside swivels and off it goes. The inside doesn't swivel, but it's been designed in such a way. Right, so that's the outside. As well as the Volkite chargers, and we should just remove those 2, which are magnetized, and we'll talk about the actual magnetization later. You get 2 additional weapon options in the kit. You get a pair of twin-linked bolters, or storm bolters, or combi bolters, depending on how you want to look at them. Rules-wise, they are all the same, and they just drop on like that. I've magnetized these to allow them to change because weapon options do vary between the 4 armies I have that can deploy this vehicle. And then finally, you have a pair of heavy flamers. Again, great magnetization opportunity. Fantastic bit of design from Will Hayes here. He's done lots of really nice to magnetize models, the Tau Flyers, the Custodian Dreadnoughts as well. Very nice preparations for the magnets. So I'm going to take off these weapons and restore it to the Volkite chargers, which are my preferred selection, and we will leave those on for the remainder of the review. So, as well as the outside, this vehicle also has a fully detailed interior, and that interior is accessed via the 2 doors on the bottom of the tank. I've tacked these in place at the moment. I'm still debating as to the best way to mount them. But you see inside, you won't be able to see inside that well because of the lack of light. And there you go, that's a bit better. And I've painted the interior. What I will do is I will leave a link to some pictures I put on Twitter and Instagram of the interior of this. So if you would like to check that out, you can do so, but I'm not going to fool around with the camera too much trying to get that done. As I say, the sides, you've got 2 doors, so if we ignore the tack, they just go together like that. And they have these runners here, which correspond to these rails, and I'm thinking about doing some sort of magnetization here. I'm considering it. It's going to be a real faff, but having painted the interior, it would be nice to have it opening and closing. Otherwise, you could take a slightly simpler approach and just stick the doors on open if you wanted. And if the interior doesn't bother you, just simply go for the closed doors. Easy peasy. Okay, so there she is. Let's now talk about the kit and the build. This is a very cleverly designed kit and certainly continues a trend of increasingly well thought through kit design from Forge World. Essentially what you've got is you've got 5 cylindrical pieces, and then you've got this end and you've got this end and a couple of details to go on. It's quite simple to build. The tolerances to get it together I think are quite fine, and I was concerned about how well it would go together, given experiences I've had in the past with some Forge World kits and size mismatches on parts. But in this case, the fit was absolutely perfect, and it is one of the few kits I had to do no heat bending on whatsoever to assemble it. So this was perfect. I bought this at the point of release. I suspect I may have got an early release model that wasn't sold at Adepticon that came back to the UK, and often those are made from the first set of molds and can be turned out better. I've heard from some other people, some of you guys and girls in the comments, about your experiences, and I've only heard positive things so far about this model. Everyone seems to say it goes together really well. So maybe Forge World are taking a slower and more careful production approach with this to make sure the parts are made to a better tolerance. And further evidence of that is that within a week of going on sale, this model was out of stock. If that is the case, I applaud Forge World for it. I think quality comes before quantity, and from a reputational standpoint, turning out good kits on something like this does wonders for you. And as I say, I was delighted with this. In terms of the actual build, I'm not going to go into that in great detail because I did a separate video where I shared my construction tips. There'll be a link to that in the description, and if you're building one of these, certainly do check it out. In brief summary, this goes together very well, and in the main, you follow the instructions and you're not going to go wrong. As I painted the interior, I built it in a slightly different order, and I would also recommend a slight change to how they show you. So by all means, build this central cylinder first, the 5 components of that. Then I built the ring, which was the engine array, and then I built the outer cutters as a separate assembly as well. And then before I did any further assembly, I made sure those had got a snug fit on either end, because I did have to do a little bit of material removal around the edges of this front section to get a good fit. It was only a small amount though, and as I say, no heat bending was required. The fit at the back was absolutely perfect. Actually, I did have one bit of heat bending. I heated up this upper section and just teased it into place with the lower section slightly of the ring, just because there was a little gap. So that was all. Heat bending is an easy way to resolve those things, but I suppose you could just have easily have filled it if you so desire, but I think getting the orientation's better. And then it was a case of just building this, sticking this engine array in. I put a pin in the upper power bottle or reactor bottle, which is this one, just for extra strength. And then you just need to assemble and build the inner cutters, which was pretty straightforward, so no big dramas there. The next thing to talk about on building was the weapons. It comes like this with a hole drilled through, and that fits a 3x2mm magnet perfectly, as do the recesses that are cut into either sides of the weapon. Now, these stick together in 2 parts either side, so you need to think about how you're going to do the magnets. As well as mounting one magnet in there, I just put one magnet in one side. You could put 2 in, but to be quite honest, using neodymium magnets, I can't see why you would need more force than is exerted by a single magnet. So I just put 1 in the side of the weapon, and I did that for the bolters and the flamers alike. When you're doing this, you need to be very mindful of getting your polarities correct, because if you stick it together, polarity's wrong, that's wrong, or get it different between weapons, you're going to have to start removing magnets, which is a right royal pain. Of course, that's an optional thing, you don't have to do it. And if you're just playing this for one force, then there's no need. I've done it interchangeable because I've got Mechanicum, I've got Legiones, Astartes, I have Militia, and I also have a Solar Auxiliary who can all use this vehicle, so I want all the weapon options. Overall, a joy to build. Comes with your modern style CAD drawn out instructions, so they're clear and you can see where all the parts go. No issues there at all. That worked very well. I kind of had worries that this was going to be a nightmare build given its complex geometry, but the polar opposite turned out to be true. It was actually a very straightforward build, and the casting quality as well was very good, even excellent across the whole kit. The only place I had any noticeable problems was with the storm bolters, and there was some mold slippage on one side of the inboard bolter, and I had to repair that with milliput, as you can see, and reshape it. Might need a little bit of final finishing that as well. Apart from that, everything was excellently cast, and as good as anyone cast a kit like this. A big thumbs up there for my particular model. It was really good. Really enjoyed it. I also painted my interior, so that added something bit extra to it. I enjoy painting the interior. It's nice. It's got a nice amount of detail without overdoing it for the amount that you can see. The interior is quite Spartan, but given it's quite hard to see inside through these little hatches, I think it's the right amount of detail. And you could greeble it up if you wanted. And if you're going for LED lighting as well, then maybe you might want to add something additional. But I think the compromise has been struck right between detail and complexity. Okay, now let's move on and do some size comparisons with this vehicle. So let's start off with a couple of the people who may be occupants. So there we go, one Terrax. Let's start with Solar Auxiliary. So here we have a Velataris Prime from a Storm section, armed with a Volkite Charger. So he fits right in with the pod weapons. And if we stand him alongside the Terrax, we can see it's a pretty tall vehicle. And if we do the same thing at the end, yeah, it's quite a good sized vehicle. Not small by any measure. It's more than twice his height, including his base. In the game, this can carry a dozen occupants, so 12 standard troops. So I mean, 40k vehicle scaling is always a bit odd. They tend to look a bit smaller than they need to be. But then again, if you look at a modern armoured fighting vehicle, an infantry fighting vehicle, and stick the crew alongside it and the infantry carries, they tend to look smaller than you think they should do. So not as bad as all that, I don't think. And then here we have a Breach Marine, and specifically a Medusan Immortal from the Iron Hands Legion. And if we put him alongside as an example of a Legiones Astartes, yeah, not quite so big, but it's still about twice his height. I've not chosen these two miniatures by accident. These are actually typical occupants I would field, either Veletaris or Breach Marines with my Iron Hands. Perfect for that. It's not an assault vehicle, which we'll come back to, so it suits your close range shooty types and objective campers well. Okay, let's do a vehicle comparison. And as this is a troop transport, it is only right and proper that we compare it against the all-time classic favourite metal box, the Demos Pattern Rhino. And you know, as a Heresy player, this is my go-to comparison for an APC. So what do we think? Well, height-wise, it's a big beastie, isn't it? And that's coming back to its cylindrical, pentagonal nature. It's probably about a third taller than the Rhino, obviously ignoring its cupola and turret weapons. If we then do an end-to-end comparison, we'll have to go a bit further away for that. It is longer, you would expect that. And if I put them end-to-end, so they're end-to-end now, the Terrax has probably got, ignoring the mine plough on the Rhino, maybe about an extra quarter length on it, 25% longer, or if we count that, maybe, I don't know, 15-10% longer. And width-wise, that's probably the one area where the Rhino is indeed wider. Actually, if we took the exhaust stacks off the Rhino, it would be the same width as the widest point on the Terrax, which is these two tracks. So that's the Rhino, and let's do one final comparison against a larger Legiones Astartes vehicle, or Space Marine vehicle, which is a Sicaran main battle tank. So a medium battle tank from the Space Marine arsenal. Late Crusade in the case of Horus Heresy, relic of the armory for 40k. Compared to the Sicaran, the Termite is a smaller vehicle. It's probably, I think lengthwise, probably quite close. Yeah, lengthwise they're actually identical end to end. Widthwise the Sicaran is substantially wider, even if we discount the sponson las cannons. You know, you've got this much extra width. With the sponson las cannons, then the Sicaran is actually approaching twice the width of the Terrax, which actually, when you think about it, the Sicaran, that gives the Terrax certain advantages because it can get down narrower areas than the Sicaran. And height-wise, the Sicaran is probably about the same. Yeah. Obviously, if you were to stick a cupola-mounted weapon on the Sicaran, then it's going to be taller. Interestingly, these kits are of comparable cost. If I remember rightly, the Sicaran is currently £79, whereas the Terrax is £75. You clearly get more resin in your Sicaran and more valuable battlefield unit, but the Terrax, you know, you're getting a more interesting and collectors focused model, I would say. Parts count wise, the Terrax has got a lot more parts, and I can see why it's more expensive than the Sicaran, because the thing to remember with Forge World kits is the general driver of cost is the parts count. Now let's move on and talk about the rules and some tactics for using this in 7th and then 8th edition games of Warhammer 40,000. Right, let's start in the Heresy in 7th edition. This is a very versatile purchasing choice because you can use this for the Mechanicum, the Legiones Astartes, the Imperialis Militia and the Solar Auxilia. All four forces can field this as a fast attack option. If you buy it, it can be used for any, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint mine in a non-generic paint scheme, so basically it looks right for any of those four forces I have. All four vehicles are quite similar with little differences and deviations according to the weapon options. There are no differences in special rules. The Solar Auxilia variant doesn't have the Explorator adaptation that most auxiliary vehicles do. Terrax is exempt from that, which is a shame because it would have made it a bit of a tougher cookie, but yeah, it doesn't have that. Right, let's go through the general rules and then we'll talk about the specific differences which are minor between the factions. The Terrax is a fast attack choice for the 4 forces that I've just mentioned. Its profile is as follows. The rules are currently available on Forge World's website, so if you go to the product page, you can go and download them, so they're freely available, so well worth getting while they are. Its profile is as follows. Ballistic skill is 4, its front and side armour is 12, its rear armour is 10, and it has 3 hull points. Unit composition is 1 Termite assault drill, it's a vehicle tank, and war gear for the Mechanicum version, which we're starting on, is 2 twin-linked Volkite chargers. It has a number of special rules. Deep strike, subterranean assault, death from below, melter cutters and crawling advance. Access points, 1 either side, and transport capacity is 12 models, and it can't carry bulky, very bulky or extremely bulky models, so you are limited to standard infantry. So that does restrict its utility somewhat, particularly in the Mechanicum list. And unfortunately for the Solar Auxilia and the Militia, no subterranean striking Ogryns either. Returning to the options, so for the Mechanicum, you can take Blessed Auto Simulacra for 5 points, extra armour for 5, armoured Ceramite for 20, and you can replace the Volkite chargers with heavy flamers for free, and that variant costs 85 points. For the Legiones Astartes, the base cost is 80 points. That is armed with 2 twin-linked bolters, or combi bolters, as I think they should really be called. And it has the following options. You can take an auxiliary drive for 10, extra armour for 5, and armoured Ceramite for 20, so an additional mobility option there. You can take heavy flamer for 10 or a twin-linked Volkite charger for 10 in place of the bolters. For the Solar Auxilia, it costs 80 points base and is armed with 2 heavy flamers. Your options are extra armour for 25 points or armoured Ceramite for 20 points. You can replace the heavy flamers for a twin-linked Volkite charger for free. And finally, for the Imperialis Militia and Cults, it only costs 75 points, and it has the following options: extra armour for 5 points and armoured Ceramite for 20 points. It's armed with 2 heavy flamers and it has no weapon options. Now, I'll leave it to you guys and girls to crunch the numbers there, but there's a bit of a mishmash in points and some of them don't seem to make sense. So for example, on the Solar Auxilia variant, extra armour at 25 points looks like a typo to me. I believe that should only be 5 points. The costs don't quite scale directly according to weapon options. If you want the Volkites, then the Mechanicum version is cheapest. If you want heavy flamers, you're best off with the Imperialis Militia version. So it's a bit of a mishmash, and you've got some different options. You've got the Auto Simulacra on the Mechanicum, you've got the auxiliary drive on the Legiones Astartes, so slightly different flavours of the same vehicle. Okay, so those are the faction differences. Now let's talk about the actual rules. Now there's a great mass of stuff here, so I'm going to condense it down as best I can. Subterranean Assault. This is a key party piece of this model. It's an upside down drop pod, so it's an underground drop pod. Instead of coming down from the heavens, it comes up from the ground. The only difference with Subterranean Assault is it is a separate rule to the drop pod assault rule, so the two don't interact. So anything you put into these are then netted off from your total, and you then do all your drop pod assault calculations against the total of your force, excluding anything that's embarked on the Terrax. So I guess that's a little bit of difference, isn't it? Because you're using an FOC slot in fast attack for these, it makes sense. That's Subterranean Assault. Terrestrial Disregard. Now this is where you get to kill stuff. You deep strike this vehicle in, and to do so you place a large blast 5-inch template where you want it to emerge. You roll to scatter as normal, and then it arrives as per deep strike point on the template. This is where it gets interesting. If the marker scatters onto impassable terrain, a building, ruin, fortification, a vehicle engaged in combat, reduce the scatter distance by the minimum needed to avoid the obstacle. So that's a bit like inertial guidance on a drop pod. Then a single vehicle or fortification which obstructs the arrival of a Terrax in that manner closest to your original position suffers an immediate strength 10 hit with no AP. Vehicles take hits on their side armour. Any unit engaged in a combat which obstructs a marker suffers D6 strength 6 AP4 hits, so beware Mechanicum and Auxilia. If a final position of a large 5-inch blast marker covers or touches any enemy or friendly unit, then that unit suffers D6 strength 6 AP4 hits. The rule then continues. After all the damage is resolved, the subterranean assault vehicle may be placed in any orientation, so as long as the centre of a large blast marker is beneath part of the vehicle's hull and remains 1 inch away from any fortification, vehicle or unit engaged in combat, so standard engagement rules there. The area under the large blast marker is now difficult terrain for the rest of the game. Players may, should they wish to, instead represent this area with a piece of terrain. Final bit, and this is a bit that might upset some people if you're on the receiving end. Should a subterranean assault vehicle be placed on top of any unit which does not pose an obstacle to its arrival as described above, the terrestrial disregard special rule allows it to be placed as though the unit was not there. If some models in the unit would end up beneath the vehicle when it reaches its final position, it makes no difference whether or not the unit is falling back. These models must be moved out of the way by the controlling player by the shortest distance, leaving at least 1 inch between them and the vehicle, and indeed any other unit, whilst maintaining unit coherency and staying on the tabletop. Any models that cannot manage this are crushed and removed from play as casualties with no saves allowed. Now get a load of that. If you pop this thing up in the right place, you do it cunningly, block off routes of escape, you can instant death even a Primarch with this thing. How about that? Nasty. Will it be easy to pull off? No, I imagine that'd be very difficult to execute, but the option's there, the potential is there. I'll be interested to hear what everybody thinks of that rule in the comments, because it's a very rare instance in game where you actually get to insta-kill units like that. In effect, no defensive dice roll made at all, or no wound rolls, no damage done at all. Very interested to hear what you think about that. Okay, so that's terrestrial disregard, which is in effect deep strike rule. So basically this pops up and causes all sorts of mayhem. Then you spill out a dozen bad hombres to cause more trouble. The Termite assault drill ignores difficult and dangerous terrain. In addition, it adds +2 strength when making ramming attacks against fortifications. Very nice. So this just smooshes through the terrain. Brilliant stuff. And then the final special rule is crawling advance. A Terrax pattern termite may never move faster than combat speed, and it can't move flat out. So it's slow. And that's your trade-off for all that crunchy stuff and the way it appears. It's slow. Still, all that said, it's a very interesting option for an army and presents more than your typical drop pod does in terms of its combat potential. And you know, it's fairly well armed. Okay, it's not massively well armed, and drop pods can be quite well armed as well, but the ability to move, and it's got an armor of 12, which, yeah, it's not stellar, but it's certainly not going to get killed by any light weaponry. That gives it some real potential. It's that ability to come up and crunch enemy units and even insta-kill them, which is really amazing, I think. And also, you know, if you imagine you're fighting a super heavy vehicle, those are quite hard to move out of the way. If you play this right, you can strength 10 hit one and hurt them down and then ram them afterwards. So yeah, quite interesting. 12 occupants, well, that's quite interesting because lots of the squads this will carry. So Breacher Marines, and Velataris storm sections and flamer sections and power axe sections come in 10s, which leaves you just the right amount of space to attach a medic, a medicae or an apothecary, and let's not forget a hero. So 12's a nice number, isn't it? For the Mechanicum, this is less useful because most of the Mechanicum's good stuff, so let's say Myrmidons and the Terrax, in particular the Myrmidons for close range killing, I mean irradiation, engines and graviton imploders are absolutely deadly up close. You can't get them in this, so you don't have that option. However, put a tech priest in with a large bunch of servo automata, armed appropriately, you could have fun there. And of course, you have the Skelax custodian automata as well. They would work rather well. So if I remember rightly, those don't count as bulky models, so you could put 10 of those in here, or even 12. That's a lot of power because they have 2 wounds each, and they're pretty solid and well armed. Yeah, maybe a bunch of Skelax with a Magos or something popping up could be a nasty option. Less useful for the militia, but then again, with the right provenance, you can make some really tough grenadier units, which I'm sure would work with this very well. Legion is Astartes, well, I would use this with Breacher Marines, which I think will work really well, particularly with the Iron Hands. Any short-range shooter guys will work brilliant. I mean, even plasma gun squads and melter gun squads, tactical support squads, those would go really nice in here. You know, you can imagine the sort of short-range, hard-hitting firing units that would work with this well. So that's the Age of Darkness and the Horus Heresy. Let's now cycle forward 10,000 years and talk about Warhammer 40,000 rules. Now, I'm going to do this a bit more briefly. There are 2 versions in Warhammer 40,000. You have the Space Marines Termite, and then you also have the Hellforged Termite of the Chaos Marines. First thing to note, it is not a relic. So this is a bog standard, use it, transport, no relic rules. It's not going to restrict you in the relics department, so that's quite neat. I can see why they've done it because it's a relatively low value unit, and if it was a relic, no one would ever take them, I don't think. Profiles: power is 6, movement is 6, strength is 7, toughness 8, 10 wounds, leadership 8, saving throws 3+. In the damage box, we have damage gradations of 1 to 2, 3 to 5, and 6 to 10. Weapon skill drops from 4 to 5 to 6+. Ballistic skill drops from 3 to 4 to 5+, and attacks drops from 4 to 3 to D3. It is armed with a melter cutter and 2 storm bolters. A melter cutter is a range of 8, pistol 1, standard melter, profile, strength 8, -4 AP, d6 damage, half range or less, reroll the d6 damage if you want. You've got your standard melter effect there. Storm bolter is standard fare, heavy flamer is a weapon option, standard fare again. And you're allowed to replace your weapons independently, so you could have 1 storm bolter and 1 heavy flamer, which I do quite like that. And that also fits with the way that 40k's become nice and flexible in 8th edition. Deep striking, so in 40k it's called subterranean assault, exactly the same as normal. You put it in your reserves and it can enter play in your movement phase 9 inches away from the nearest enemy unit. Nice and simple, straightforward stuff. When it comes through, it has a rule called breaching tremor. And it says, when this model arrives on the battlefield by performing a subterranean assault, enemy units within 12 inches suffer a single mortal wound. Nice. Enemy units, so no, every single one does. Brilliant. Send this up in the middle of a bunch of elite infantry units, you could cause a lot of damage. It also has a rule explodes. If a model is reduced to 0 wounds, roll d6, on a 6 explodes. Each unit within 6 inches suffers d3 mortal wounds. It can transport 12 chapter infantry. It can't transport jump pack, Terminator or Primaris models. It has the faction keywords of Imperium, Adeptus Astartes and chapter, and keywords of vehicle, transport, termite assault drill. Points cost is 92 base, you've got to add 10 onto that for the melter cutter, 2 for each storm bolter and 17 for each flamer. So there you go. Now its Chaos stablemate, the Hellforge version, is exactly the same, apart from it has the Machina Malefica rule, and it basically says anytime it slays models in the fight phase, roll a number of d6s equal to the number of models it's slain. For each roll of a 5 or more, you restore 1 wound, but you can't heal it by other methods. In the same turn, it uses Machina Malefica. And then it also has a rule which balances that because the points values are the same as the Imperial Marine version in the belly of the beast, and basically says at the end of the movement phase in which 1 or more units disembarks from the Hellforged Termite, roll d6. On a 1, 1 model from a disembarking unit chosen by the controlling player is slain, so it gets gobbled. But on the plus side, they do count towards Machina Malefica. It's not all bad news. And thinking about that, there's some hilarious options to put teeth around those doors to just, you know, reflect the fact it might eat you. It has the same points costs and faction words flipped around for chaos. What do I think? Well, it lacks some of the potentially very powerful capabilities of the 7th edition version, but it's still a solid vehicle. In particular, that toughness of 8 is unusual for an infantry transport of its size, so that's going to keep it in the fight longer. Machina Malefica will allow it to restore wounds when otherwise it might get destroyed. In general, just the ability to drive around and cause trouble is quite a lot of fun. It's a slow vehicle at 6 inches move. The melter cutters mean if it's in melee, you know, there's always a risk you're going to get vaporized by that pistol weapon of the melter array. So that brings us to the end of this big review. There was a lot to cover with the Terrax pattern termite assault drill, loads of stuff to go over there. I hope you've enjoyed going over it. As always, I'd love to know what you think about this vehicle. I love the vehicle, I just love the design. It's so cool. I really like it. It's a great model, and my kit was just beautifully executed. I had a lot of fun putting this together. Just hope that Forge will maintain the same standard of model assembly with later versions as well. I think as long as they do that, certainly for the modelers, it's a must buy. It's certainly a fluffy unit on the tabletop. Cost wise, it's expensive for the points you get, but I don't really think that's what they're aiming at here. I think they're more appealing. You know, maybe the people like the older style designs, reimaged. I certainly think this one is more of a modelist piece than they normally do. Anyway, as I say, those are my thoughts. Please share yours down in the comments section. I'll be very interested to hear as always. But other than that, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.